Want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money, all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify, and when you want to take conversations with your fans to the next level, Q&A and polls are the best way to get them talking. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions, and best of all, it's totally free. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started today.
Big Ten, Big Ten, Big Ten, football talk. Big Ten, Big Ten, Big Ten, football talk. Big Ten, Big Ten, Big Ten, football talk. Big Ten, Big Ten, Big Ten, football talk.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Big Ten Football Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Guggenheim. We are welcoming a special guest, Justin Adams, here to talk about Nebraska. Before we get to Justin, make sure you like, follow, subscribe wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Google, Spotify. We're on YouTube. Hit that like button, smash that subscribe button. But let me also welcome Justin Adams. Justin, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it.
Why don't you share with us a couple things? One, how you got into podcasting and where we can find you, and also maybe a little bit about your background with Nebraska.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, one of the biggest things that kind of springboarded me into Husker content specifically was growing up as a Nebraska fan, and just, my every single week was kind of like, hinged on the way Nebraska did. I grew up in Texas, so I was in Longhorn territory, but my family's from Nebraska. So I grew up, from when I was born, going to a Nebraska game every single season. So it's kind of just, birthed into it. My family's divided, half Texas Longhorns, half Nebraska. So that's fun. And then, my dream growing up was just to cover Nebraska football. I ended up getting into podcasting with my buddy about, a couple of years ago. We started a fantasy football podcast, just kind of, having fun with it. And then, eventually just, due to circumstances at work and stuff like that, I just couldn't find what I was passionate about. And, it just kind of one thing led to the next. And I was able to, upgrade my stuff and get on with Nebraska football at the Voice of College Football over there with Mark Rogers. And so, you can find me over there. And then recently, me and a guy I had networked with from the Illini cast, created our own Big Ten show and stuff like that. So, it was a long journey here, trying to find my lane and what I wanted to do, but, truly happy to be here and, happy to be on the show with you. That's one of the biggest things, is networking with other people and getting to know other people in this. So happy to be here, man.
Yeah, cool. And so Mark Rogers, the Voice of College Football, when does that air?
Yeah, so we have Tuesday live streams. It's Tuesday at 7 Eastern for the Nebraska stuff. And then for everything else, you can just go over to the Mark Rogers Voice of College Football Network, and I'm one of his channels, either team channels or his main channel, are streaming all day, every day. So there's call-ins and all that stuff. So you can, whatever you want to talk about, call in, you can find on there. So
Awesome.
yeah, definitely go check that out.
Cool. And the Big Ten show, that's new, right?
Yes.
That's where and when can we find that?
So that one, you can find us at Big Ten Show on X, and then Big Ten Show on YouTube as well. Might be a little hard to find just because we get buried in the algorithm. So, but we've got probably about 10, 11 videos up right there. And on that one, we do kind of breaking news type of recordings, and we're going to get into team previews, for each team. We're going to bring a reporter on from each team, kind of break down everybody going into the season. We'll do some power rankings, etc. So a lot coming up there. So that one's video oriented. And then on Mark Rogers channels, I also do a lot of recordings as well. So
Awesome.
you can check all that out. A lot to
Awesome.
like on both. So
Well, hopefully we can help boost the algorithm so people can
Absolutely.
find you a little bit easier. So
Likewise, appreciate it.
nice. Well, I'm excited. We're going to talk Nebraska, and I've loved what Nebraska has done since moving on from Scott Frost. Listeners from the early going know that I was a very heavy criticizer of Scott Frost, and I'm very excited about Matt Rhule. This year they went 5-7, so I think a lot of people expected more, but I feel like the vibe is just way different than at the end of the Scott Frost era. Has it felt different to you? And if so, why?
100%. It's we could have finished with the same, record as the last Scott Frost season, and I would have felt the same way. One of the main things that I was telling, Nebraska fans, because a lot of them coming off the season with, being that close to bowl eligibility and then kind of, falling off the table there at the end of the season, rattling off some close losses there at the end. That Iowa one was brutal. But, coming out of that, there's a lot of emotion and people are, really up in arms. But if it's because of the emotion of being in that situation, right? And being there on the doorstep of bowl eligibility, which is something we haven't felt in a while. And so one of the biggest things I pointed to was, if you look at all of the issues that this team had when Scott Frost got fired, and you list those, right? And that comes down to penalties, ill-timed turnovers, which still happened. Just lack of effort. The team was just not cohesive. There was always some kind of friction within the organization, the unity of the athletic department as a whole. There was just no connection, no buy-in. It just felt like Scott Frost was kind of there. And, there was rumors about him being, late to meetings or showing up drunk to meetings after, and so that kind of shows where the issues lie with Riola. One of the biggest reasons why, him and Dylan Riola didn't have a good connection is because he canceled one of the visits with Riola and did it via Zoom call. And so it's like, that's a 5-star recruit right there, And so it's little things like that. Whereas Rhule, right? Like Rhule is also, he comes from a background as minister, preacher. And so like when he speaks, right, like he can command a room. And there's leadership qualities about him that just jump off when you just hear him speak. And looking at what he has done in terms of the athletic department, right? He's there supporting and bringing recruits to women's basketball games. He's out there buying food for the volleyball team and taking a picture. He's really embracing and bringing a culture in there that wasn't there before. And the culture is that of, it's going to be structured. It's going to be done his way, but there's a camaraderie to this team and the way that the kind of overall vibe is with the team. It just has them wanting to play for each other. And that comes out on the field. You can see these guys, they trust each other on the field, and that's leading to them playing loose and free. Whereas before, I just think it was a lot of thinking. When you can't play on instinct, you're really, really going to have a hard time playing the game of football because you're going to be slow. You're going to be late on everything if you're thinking. You have to be instinctive. You have to react. And I think that's what this team does that Scott Frost team didn't do. And, at the same time, that Scott Frost team started 0-6 his first season. 0-6, beat Minnesota at home. And, one of the biggest things, too, about the naysayers to Rhule, as I was telling them, is like, have that same amount of patience with Rhule. What people have done in some instances is carry over the impatience from the Frost era into the Rhule era. And you got to reset it just like we did with Frost. You got to reset that and give him the same respect. And it's just a matter of what he's been able to do with, the recruiting. The recruiting is 100 times better. I mean, landing a guy like Dylan Riola and landing Carter Nelson and Grant Bricks, who are our 3 biggest targets, and we got those guys. We didn't have to go to our secondary options. Not only that, we landed a guy like Kalen. a four-star, quarterback who came in even with Riola. And that's hard to get a four-star in today's modern college football world to come in the same class as a five-star. But it's because he believes in this staff and he believes in Coach Rhule. And it's evident in everything he does. And we'll get into the hiring on the staff and stuff like that, and some of the decisions he's made in the transfer portal. But navigating right now with a very, very, we're 10 over on scholarships. So he's navigating that's why we have a small transfer portal class. We're about 10 over in scholarships. So the numbers aren't there, but he's still, recruiting and getting high impact guys and guys that are instantly going to come in and start. And it didn't seem like Frost had a plan. Matt Rhule definitely has a plan.
Yeah. Well, and I think something I had mentioned, and I think you're just giving us so much more insight into this, but culture really matters especially in college football, in all sports, it matters, but culture really does matter. And I think it was the Minnesota game, the first game of the season, where Nebraska lost in painstaking fashion again.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw everybody reacting, and I was like, guys, it takes a long time to kind of flush that out of your system.
Yep.
And I was grateful then that I think it was three or four games later, they had a close win and they held on to it. And I was like, see, this is a step in the right direction. Yeah. I think the other thing, and this is off book, but I think a lot of people wanted Matt Rhule to be like Deion Sanders. And so Deion had a lot of the flash, the flash and the style early on. And he had the big win, obviously the big win against Nebraska. Yeah. But I think people didn't realize how much of the infrastructure needed to be rebuilt. And you can't do that with what Deion was he was kind of pasting over bad culture, whereas Matt Rhule is kind of getting it down or trying to build from ground zero again.
Yeah. Yeah. And the way I, use those two programs, like when I think about those two programs, each of those coaches, I feel like recruited the way that they absolutely had to. Okay. So with Nebraska, we have resources, we have, the history, we have these things that we can recruit from and we can point to and be like, a lot of players want to come restore Nebraska's glory. Dylan Raiola talked a lot about that. And a lot of these players, and the reason why Nebraska's still been able to have top 25 recruiting classes pretty consistently is because even these kids hear about what Nebraska was. And they go in there and they see, all of the trophies and all this other stuff and the fan support. And Colorado really didn't have those things to point at and to, be like, come to Colorado. And so I feel like with that being said, Colorado was one of those teams that needed a flashy hire to come in and really bring, those quick transfer portal guys in, those big name guys, because I don't think Colorado is the type of school that you can come in and you can completely just flip around and turn into like a winning program with where they were. I think it's one of those things where they needed that flashy face to come in there. I don't think Matt Rhule would have moved the needle in Colorado. I think he would have done well there, but I don't think that was the right fit for him. Just like, Deion wouldn't have been the right fit in Nebraska. He's a lot of flash, not a lot of substance. He's, not a good recruiter. He's really just very reliant on these kids that want to go play for Prime. And we'll see if that works out there. But with Matt Rhule coming over to Nebraska, it's like he's a guy that, we talk about the importance of culture. And with the culture, it's everything. Culture is everything. And that's why I think, over on Deion's team, you see a lot of undisciplined plays. You see a lot of undisciplined guys. You got his sons going to a Paris fashion show instead of missing the first team meeting a couple of days ago. Whereas, there's accountability, over on the Nebraska side and stuff like that. And it's the little fine-tuned details like that I think will separate the teams that can be middle of the road from the teams that can, be back at the top. And there's certain things in the way Dion recruits, that won't work. You can't patchwork an offensive line together through the transfer portal. I firmly believe that you have to build an offensive line. They need cohesion. They need camaraderie. And so, yeah, I just think those polar opposites of what those programs are. And then the Nebraska game, coming into the season, Jeff Sims was supposed to be the guy. And, Matt Rhule made all the right decisions up until, it was time to pick a quarterback. And unfortunately, that was the biggest decision he needed to make. And the one they got wrong was picking the wrong quarterback. Jeff Sims was not it. And so, we went into that Colorado game with Jeff Sims, and Jeff Sims had 4 fumbled 4 snaps, in that first half. And, what Nebraska needed to do in that game was establish a run and wear down that small Colorado defensive line. But they kept giving them the ball back. Our defense stayed on the field, and honestly, playing at altitude, our defense got worn down after a while. The game was close until the end. But I think the trajectory of the programs is going to be completely different. And, I just – the close losses, yeah, they were still there, but the close losses and the turnovers were 2 of the things that were still there. Everything else from year over year seemed to have gotten fixed. And in my opinion, turnovers are one of the easier things to coach out of kids because, ball security is something that can be taught. There's certain things athletically and intangibles and innately that can't be developed. Ball security is one of them. So, that's a good positive, at least on that side. But yeah, it's going to take time. And I think this season and getting these lumps out of the way the first season was necessary. And these players are going to grow. Nebraska did lose a lot of people in the portal. We didn't lose really any big talent in the portal. And I think that's another thing culture wise. These players in the world of transfer portal want to be there and want to play for him and want to be part of this.
Yeah, and I think that leads to my next question. Is obviously they've got a lot of talent coming back.
Mm-hmm.
Henrik Harburg is back. Sims and Purdy are not. But I didn't realize this. But Harburg had all their wins. He was 5-3. The other guys were 0-for.
Mm-hmm.
And Harburg had some flashes. Certainly had some moments where you're like, "Oof, this is rough."
Yeah,
but. Like he was certainly the guy going forward. Is he the definitive starter next year? Or do you think Raiola or another quarterback comes in and competes for the job next year?
It's Raiola's to lose right now.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. And Kalen is going to battle, but the reality is right now, unless they bring in another quarterback, which will be hard to bring in a portal quarterback at this point, that especially wants to come in and compete with a 5-star. Heinrich Harburg is a very good athlete. He's just very limited as a quarterback, and especially with the way that they want to run this offense. So he was very dependent on his legs. And then as the season went along, very early on in the season, when he first started, he was very physical and, was see an opening and he would take it, and he would run into the interior line. He would lower shoulder into a guy, but we had him running 22 times a game. And over the course of the season, you started to see him get a little bit more hesitant as he was, would run towards the line of scrimmage. He would kind of hunker down a little bit and be a little bit more hesitant to attack, which led to a lot of those runs that he was getting not turning into yards. And you saw our points per game suffer. And he just didn't have the ability to consistently be accurate, especially with the deep ball. And one of the biggest things that Marcus Satterfield offenses, want to do is he does like to get big and physical. He likes to run, multiple tight ends. He likes to run the ball and be really physical in the run game. But he also likes to set up the deep pass. And, we didn't have that ability because Heinrich Harburg's one of his biggest struggles is accuracy with the deep ball. And that's one of Raiola's biggest strengths. And so Harburg is very much, I consider him like a Taysom Hill type of quarterback, where he can make throws, but if you ask too much of him, if you ask him to read a defense, if you ask him to look at post-snap, coverages, try to distinguish a shell defense. Are they running zone? Are they running man? Cover 2, cover 3? You're not really going to get him to do that. You're also not going to get him to go through his progressions. It's a read and he's out. And that made the offense really, really hard to run. It's hard to run an offense with a quarterback who's a running guy who can only make one read and out, especially with our entire receiving core basically being down to true freshmen. Our entire receiving core got injured. Marcus Washington was our most tenured. He got injured. Isaiah Garcia Castaneda got injured, and we lost Trey Palmer to the draft the previous year. And so it was a lot of struggle. But, I think Heinrich Harburg is going to be a good leader and mentor in that locker room to these guys. But it's Dylan's to lose right now. It's probably going to be him.
With that, obviously there was a lot of smoke with Dylan to Nebraska. It was a big win. He was committed to Ohio State, then he was committed to Georgia.
Yep.
And now he's at Nebraska. So there's already a lot of cachet attached to Dylan's name, because those are two of the top 5 programs in college football.
Yep.
And Nebraska beat them out. Yep. And really beat Georgia out more than anybody else. What does that signal a shift in how we should view the Huskers in terms of the national landscape moving forward?
I think so for a couple of reasons. One of the biggest things that, Scott Frost wasn't able to do is, like I said earlier, he kind of dropped the ball in the recruiting of Raiola. And then, of course, Matt Rhule came in and immediately, tried to reestablish that connection and get that going. And Nebraska was the favorite to land him there for a little bit. After his visit out to Nebraska. And then he went to the national championship game, where Georgia beat TCU. And then, that was his, he met Kirby Smart out there and did his visit out there. And, it's easy to get caught up in that pomp and circumstance, of that, and being out there and being in it and just, seeing all the celebration and, there's a lot. And so people, I feel like, are really hard on Dylan for what they call quote unquote commitment issues. But what they got to understand is, first off, he's a high school kid. And I know he moved high schools multiple times, but the moving of high schools wasn't his decision. That was his dad. His dad was a historic lineman for Nebraska, played in the NFL. His uncle was our offensive line coach. So there's been those connections there. And of course, he's from Nebraska. And from Hawaii, but his dad played in Nebraska, so he lived. So it's he's always there. So it's one of those things where it's like it was the legacy versus the Georgia, the top of the top. And I think based on his comments after, his heart was always with Nebraska, but like I said, it's just he's an 18-year-old kid. He gets the pull of like all of that stuff going on. You see all those people, you see all the cameras, it's easy when you're a 5-star number 1 in the country and want to really go to the NFL and be successful, have a successful career to just fall into that trap. And but afterwards he was basically just like, he's like, I took the time, to sit here and think back of what I really wanted to do. And, he said he just felt like, it was his purpose to go and restore the order in Nebraska and bring Nebraska back to what they were. And so I don't think it's one of those things, because people are like, he'll be gone in a year and all that other stuff. I don't think that's the case, because, he was trying to side out the top of the top in Nebraska, which he has ties to. Where else would he go? There's no other place that fits for him. Nebraska seemed to be the best fit all along. The reason why I think it changes the national landscape is, players want to come play with a guy that can help them, is beneficial to them. And coming off of last season with that offense that we fielded, it was going to be tough sledding trying to get a skill position player to want to come play here. I promise you that. And so that was almost necessary, that we needed a big splash in the quarterback, area to be able to land even some of these guys that we have out of the portal, because wide receiver was a big need, but it can't be understated how much we needed receivers. And I don't know how well we would have done bringing guys in otherwise, with the quarterback situation the way it was. So I think it helps in that regard in terms of recruiting. And just, another thing, Matt Rhule building these relationships with these guys. He always says he didn't continue to recruit Dylan, but after he committed to Georgia, because he tries not to do that. But he's like he was there if he needed them, and he builds genuine relationships with these kids, and I think that is one of the biggest things that came out of this is the fact that Dylan saw that, and Dylan reached out to Matt Rhule. Rhule didn't reach out to him. It was the other way around.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
Yeah.
So let me throw you a curveball here. And if you don't know the answer, that's okay. Or if you need time to think about it. If Dylan Raiola was the starter last year for all 12 games, what's Nebraska's record?
So I'll preface this with saying that there is a college football, I think it's college football data on Twitter, something like that, where they do this aggregate score every year of the win total, right? And then they have a formula to make up the expected win total, what it should have been.
Yeah.
The way they do that is they randomize every single play in every single game. And, the turnovers aren't at ill-advised times. They're just randomly sporadic throughout, the penalties, everything. The play results, all of that gets randomly randomized. In Nebraska, 3 of the last 5 seasons has been number 1 on that list. This last season, they were at 5 wins. The win expectancy was 8. And so I think probably, we had a top 25 defense, did have a young receiver core, lost a lot of games by 1 score. I would say probably comfortably in the 8 to 9 win range based on that. I still think there would be some growing pains, but the schedule overall was fairly easy last year. And so I do believe we would have probably been in the 8 range conservatively, probably 9.
Yeah. And I mean, at that point, there was a point last year where I thought, could Nebraska compete for the Big Ten West and get to the Big Ten championship game?
Yeah, it's there was flashes for sure, but it was the injuries. I mean, we lost our starting 2 running backs by week 5. We only had 8 of our 11 opening day starters out. Yeah, so it was rough sledding. Yeah, we were down to true freshmen all over the field, which was good for development, though.
Yeah, good for development, but that's tough for anybody. It would have been tough for Michigan, let alone Nebraska.
Yeah. And that's why, those close games were still, these guys aren't experienced. But I mean, I tell you what, they grew a lot from those close games.
Yeah, that's really insightful to talk about the depth. I knew that the top 2 running backs were out, and I knew that there were a number of injuries. I didn't realize it was that severe with 8 guys out on the offense.
Yeah, and at one point, all 3 quarterbacks, 2 of them being running quarterbacks, and Chuba barely, he runs, but didn't have a ton of experience. And so, with 3 running quarterbacks, and at one point, all of them were banged up with lower body injuries, and so that's another reason why I was just like, if this was a Scott Frost team, this team would have won 1 game. And wow. Matt Rhule had him at a position to win, because Scott Frost's team stayed fairly healthy outside, Martinez was there most of the time. Trey Palmer, Casey Thompson was, Trey Palmer was the biggest part of that offense last year. He stayed healthy in the year before. And so the fact that they were able to patchwork this team together the way they did and still, manage 5 wins, it's looking at just the record alone doesn't really, it understates how well this coaching staff did.
Yeah. And we'll talk about the coaching staff in a minute, but coming in with Raiola, you mentioned the excitement around a player of that caliber. Well, they have some transfers coming.
Yes.
I think Nair and Banks at wide receiver. Is it Dowdell or Dowdle?
Yeah, I've heard it said both. I just say Dowdle.
Okay. But he's coming in at running back. How do those pieces impact the offense for next year?
Yeah, those are some of the pieces that they're very much Matt Rhule type of guys, because what these guys are is they're under the radar for certain reasons, right? But they're still highly rated instant impact type of guys. So you got a guy like Dante Dowdle. Dante Dowdle's not really an under radar guy. He was a top 10 running back in the 2023 recruiting class over at Oregon, just, was a true freshman, didn't play much, but averaged over 5 yards a carry. And looking, I went back and watched, the high school film because I didn't really have much college film on him, but just a very physical runner at the point of attack. He's one of those guys that can come in and be a workhorse if need be. But he can also, be a kind of a change of pace guy and be your more physical back to where we have, a guy like Ramir Johnson type of running back where he's going to be out and, kind of getting in space and stuff like that. But what Dowdle does is he really fits Marcus Satterfield's type of offense. And that's one of the biggest things. And not only that, just being able to go get a top 10 guy out of the 2023 class just as a transfer was huge. So I think long-term, he's going to be a very, very big key piece to this team. Short-term, Jamal Banks, in my opinion, is going to be the number one receiver in the offense next year. He's going to be the X receiver. Jamal Banks, man, when watching his film, they didn't have a good offense over there at Wake, but he was our number one receiver. And his physicality, the way he goes up and gets the ball, he really attacks the ball. He's got great ball skills. The only couple things that I think he can work on, a little bit polish of his route running, but he's a monster, and his stats don't show that. And that's why he's kind of a little bit under the radar in terms of that. It's just because the Wake offense and the Wake quarterback's not good. But 1,200 yards over the last couple of seasons. And he's really what Nebraska's been missing. Malachi Coleman was a 4-star, our big fish in the last year's class. But again, he's very, very young, very inexperienced. We needed a guy with experience. Jamal Banks is he's got 3 seasons under his belt. So he's going to be a key piece. And Isaiah Nair from Texas is very interesting. To look at what Isaiah Nair, how good he is, you have to go back to Wyoming before he transferred to Texas. He had, I believe, over 1,200 yards there and a single season. I can't quite remember off the top of my head, but at Wyoming, very, very good. He went over to Texas in 2022, coming into the season. He was supposed to be, compete with Xavier Worthy for the number one wide receiver role. And he was supposed to be a big, big key cog in that offense. Well, he got injured in the spring game. And so he had to set out all of 2022. Well, then, 2023 came around and they made a little switch. And then he struggled to get, with the coaching staff change, he struggled to get onto the field after that, had 1 reception for 14 yards. But looking back at his tape, now he's a year removed from the ACL tear, and looking back at what he did, these guys recover 100% from ACL tears, nowadays in modern medicine. What he does is he's a big body guy too, but he can also go up and get 50-50 balls, but he's a deep stretch guy. He runs a 4.40. The dude can absolutely fly. And so he is going to be the absolute, 1B to Jamal Banks's 1A, where Jamal Banks is going to be that sure-handed reception type of guy and the red zone type of guy. And Isaiah Nair can do a little bit of both, but you want to get the ball in his hands and get him in space and try to hit him on deep routes, because in the open field, he's a handful. But I think it's kind of one of those things where Jamal Banks is probably going to have the biggest impact next year, followed by Nair. And then, Gabe Irvin's coming back. So our running back room's a little bit more bolstered, but I think Dante Dowdle, career-wise, is going to have a great career at Nebraska for sure.
Well, it's helpful to, every player that we just talked about, you described big, physical.
Yep.
Which even with Nair, as a speedster, like big body, physicality, which I think it's helpful, because I remember seeing, I think almost every Nebraska game, seeing people say Marcus Satterfield's not it at OC, and this is not. But it's just, there's a reality that if you want to be a physical team, but you don't have the key pieces to be physical, then it's hard to do what you want to do. And so I'm excited, just as you're talking about, I'm excited to see what this new look Cornhusker team will look like under Satterfield in year 2. Because I think we'll get to see just more of what Satterfield brings to the table as a coordinator. But also we're going to get to see at least flashes of what Dylan Raiola can do with an actually good wide receiving core and a good running back core. So absolutely.
And Satterfield, much maligned for, I don't understand, because if people are going to be patient with Rhule, they have to be patient with Satterfield for the same reasons I mentioned in the offensive. He can't go out there and play. He can only work with what he's got, and he did the best he could with what he had, and he didn't have a lot. And so, I think it's going to really, like I said, he likes to throw the deep ball, and we couldn't even throw the deep ball. So he what we're going to see next year is going to be completely different. It's going to be more to his strengths, and it's just all about like kind of talked about, getting his type of personnel in there, getting these big physical guys in there to run the style of offense he wants and really impose his will there. But yeah, Satterfield was getting a lot of heat, and people got to be patient with him too. Look at Baylor. I mean, over at Carolina, he had, I believe it was like 4,800 yards passing, 2,600 yard rushing. So he does, it's one of those things where he likes to throw and run the ball. And then over at Baylor, he had his most balanced offense. I believe it was like 265 passing, 160 running per game. And so his offenses has shown success and shown balance, but people just got to be patient.
Yep. One move that they made that might help bolster that offense too. Glenn Thomas comes in as a co-offensive coordinator. He was the quarterback coach from the Steelers. How does that help moving forward?
Yeah, and this is another one where people were a little bit upset because a lot of Nebraska fans had their heart set on Dana Holgorsen. Dana Holgorsen, though, and Dana Holgorsen still might come over as an analyst just because he's getting so much money from his buyout with University of Houston. So sometimes that happens where these guys will come over and they'll take less pay because they're collecting that big buyout. Yep. The only problem I see with Holgorsen is that Holgorsen's a very type A personality. He's very outside the box, and he comes from Mike Leach. So Holgorsen and Rhule are both type A personalities. The one difference is Matt Rhule's biggest focus is recruiting, and Dana Holgorsen hates recruiting. And so that's why I saw a little bit of a potential issue when they were meeting there. Yeah. And I think that's why, he went to Glenn Thomas first after that meeting, because it's somebody he trusts. Glenn Thomas has worked with Matt Rhule at Temple and Baylor. He was with him in both of his rebuilds there. And he's got a history of success. 2012 to 2014, he helped develop Matt Ryan, and Matt Ryan had 2 of his 3 Pro Bowls in the time he was there. And, he was number 1 in completion percentage for the only time in his career. Matt Ryan was during Glenn Thomas's time there as the co-OC and QB coach. Went over to Temple, helped develop PJ Walker over there, brought them from like 100th in scoring to 42nd in 2 seasons. Over at Baylor, brought them from 98th in scoring to 27th in scoring. Helped develop Charlie Brewer over there. So, Charlie Brewer was a 2019 Davey O'Brien finalist. And then not only that, he went over to UNLV and ASU and helped develop their run games there. Charles Williams set the program rushing record. Xavier Valladay, was 10th in ASU history in rushing yards. And Trenton Bourget, the ASU quarterback in 2022, had the all-time completion percent lead at 71.4%. And so, people point to his time at Pittsburgh because the quarterback's there. And the thing about that is he wasn't even a QB coach there. He was an offensive analyst. So, yeah, he wasn't even a QB coach there. And so he's coming over as a QB coach, / co-OC. It was probably going to be hard to get him to come over as just a QB coach to pluck a guy from the NFL. So as a co-OC, he's worked with Satterfield because Satterfield worked with Rhule too. So they've all worked together. So these guys trust each other. And again, they've all had success together. You can't point to one of these guys and say like, oh, this is all because of Rhule. This is all because of him. They've worked together. And so, Matt Rhule he likes these connections with these former coaches and former players. And so he's doubling down on that. And if he trusts these guys, he's made the right decision so far. I trust in him. But just looking at, I went and really broke down Glenn Thomas's resume, and it speaks for itself. It's, if you look at the most recent stop, 1 season in Pittsburgh, I don't think you're really giving him a fair shake there. So extremely excited to see how they mold these 2 things together in these 2 styles of offense.
Yeah. And there's always, particularly when things aren't going as well as you wish, there's always a bit of, well, this is the hire I would like, and this is going to fix all the things. Mm-hmm. And I think, we go back to culture. If you want to form culture and you want to form consistency and continuity, you don't go and get the splash hire necessarily. You go and get the guys who are going to help build the foundation.
Exactly.
And, he has history with Glenn Thomas, obviously has history with Marcus Satterfield. And so I think a lot of what you're saying makes a lot of sense. Also, I think it's easy to scapegoat Pittsburgh because Kenny Pickett has looked not very good.
No, Mason,
probably putting it kindly.
Yeah.
But the track record that you just gave us makes it much more palatable to say, hey, this is not a bad hire. In fact, this could be a potentially great hire for Nebraska.
Exactly. And I think he's just one of those names that's kind of flown under the radar under the Rhule tutelage because he wasn't one of the guys that followed him over. Rhule, I feel like his name value, when he came to Nebraska kind of elevated just because it's a big hire, getting hired in Nebraska is a big hire. And then coming off of the Panthers stint, it was a little bit one of those things where his name value dropped. And so like coming over, you see the guys like Satterfield come over and they're widely regarded names, and he hires this guy, Glenn Thomas. And so I think it's easy to sit here and look back and see like, and think to yourself, like, who is this guy, Yep. But kind of like, we alluded to, it's just, his track record is success. And again, like Rhule, one of the biggest things I respect about Rhule is in the modern college football world of NIL, and it's like the wild, wild west. Everything's moving, a ton of moving parts. He still finds a way to be patient and not. It's very probably easy to want to make a big splash hire and be, blasted on social media and have all this attention to the organization, but he trusts in his plan and his staff so much that he is still sticking to those guys no matter what. Everywhere he's been, he's stick with these guys that have made him successful. And I think that's one of the things that some of these coaches do. Some of these coaches will go get a job somewhere and they just try to bring on a bunch of these big name guys to help them. But yeah, he stuck the same method with his style of recruiting, looking for these under the radar type of guys, but now he's able to recruit some of the top guys as well. But he sticks to what he knows, and what he did at Temple and Baylor, there's still elements of that here, even in this changing college football landscape. So,
yeah. Would you, and I know you're a Nebraska guy, but I think could we make the case that the Nebraska coaching staff is maybe the most underrated staff in the Big Ten?
I would definitely say so, just because kind of like I've talked about today, unless people are really digging into some of this stuff and really know these connections, it's hard and it's no fault of people's, it's just like, it's hard for them to know this kind of behind the scenes stuff. It's very easy to look at Nebraska on the field and on the surface and, see Glenn Thomas, the Steelers coach, get hired, and look at that on the surface and be like, why? Why would he hire this guy? What did we miss on Holgorsen? And I think if people just look a little deeper into it, that's not the case at all. It's not what it seems to be on the surface. And it's one of those things where it's always going to take time. Scott Frost type of turnarounds don't happen. And we saw that might have been a little bit of a flash in the pan luck there. And so it'll come in time. It'll come to fruition in time. So I think it's fair the way people see him from the outside right now. And, but I think he'll earn his way up. And I think that's the way he wants it. He's the type of guy, he wants to prove himself. He wants to earn his way up. But, and I think the biggest thing is I think he's a guy who's going to be here a while. He said it himself. He's a college guy. And I don't think there's a place that he'd probably go to that can give him more resources or more money that's going to hire, like besides your, you got your Ohio States and your Michigans, of course. But I think as far as resources go and money goes, Nebraska's right there with those schools in terms of what they can provide and pay coaches and stuff like that. And so I think he's going to be there for a long time. And I think that's another very valuable aspect in the modern college football world that's hard. You see it at Washington. you got to get guys who want to be there and be there long term. And I think Rhule is going to be very underrated in that aspect too.
Yeah. Well, I've never seen a program, and I have no shame saying this as an Ohio State guy. The fan loyalty at Nebraska, I think, and there's a lot of loyal fan bases in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
But I would put Nebraska at the top above anybody in terms of fan loyalty with the way the sellouts and just and the way they've stuck with the program, even through the Scott Frost era, the Mike Riley era, Bill Callahan, like all those guys, like they have been very, very faithful. And so that's just another, it's not just the money resources, but those fans are going to continue to bolster that as well. And so that has to be just a breath of fresh air probably for Matt Rhule too. Like you have the resources, but then you have the fans who really support the use of those resources.
Yeah, and that's actually a very good point because there's this thing called the 1890 Collective that Nebraska been working on for a long while, and what it is, it's other schools have this stuff too now, where it's fan donations, and so the 1890 Collective, 5 days before the early national signing day, they opened up and they set a $500,000 goal, and in 5 days, Nebraska fans donated over 800. I don't know if it quite got to 900,000, but over up almost $1 million. And the boosters, the boosters donate a private jet. It's one of those things that's like some of these boosters and the fan support that really helps. And just like you said, just the loyalty, because you hear all the recruits talk about it when they go out there, just how blown away they are. I flew out there, Scott Frost's first year to watch us at 0-6 beat Minnesota, week 7. So it's one of those things. It's always, and the vibes are always good out there. It's always fun. But yeah, I agree, and I try not to say it too much because I don't like to be like one of those like, oh, we got the best fan base. I like it organic and other people to kind of pick up on it. But I truly believe that, but just because it honestly does not matter how bad we are. I don't think everybody that I know is a Nebraska fan, none of those people would stop watching. And so that right there to me is just kind of like, that's the fan base for the most part. We do have our bad apples just as everybody else, but for the most part, it's one of those things where we live and die Husker football. And it's something that's, once it's kind of in your DNA, it's something that you just can't get rid of. It'll never go away.
That's good stuff.
So
let me ask a quick two last quick questions here. First is this. Defensively, they really played well. You said top 25 in the country. I think really played like they deserve that black shirt moniker. Do you see them repeating that in 2024?
Yeah, I do. And Tony White brought in the 3-3-5 from Syracuse, and what he was able to do with the talent that we had on the team, based on what our defense looked like last year over year into this year. And what it really was is, there's a lot of physicality. And you look at the team, when they stand a guy up, there's hats flying to the ball. Everybody is getting to the ball. Mm-hmm. Nobody's giving up on a play. There's no, the tackling issues that we had under Scott Frost. We're tackling in the open field. We're making it, we're being gap sound on runs. It's the little things it's the little fundamental things that Tony White's brought in, but also schematically, the 3-3-5 is hard to prepare for because, you have the jack and the rover position and they're moving all over the field. You got those versatile linebackers that can drop into the secondary like Isaac Gifford. They can drop into the secondary. They can come off the edge. They can play in the middle. Those guys are all over the field. And so you never know which guy is going to drop into coverage. You never know which guy is going to rush. You never know if they're going to bring, a blitz. And so it's a lot of confusion on the defensive side. And I think that scheme really, really has thrown a lot of people off. And the way Tony White schemes it up is to perfection. The biggest thing about this defense is we're returning 8 of the 11 starters. And not only that, we've gone out and bolstered that a little bit in the linebacker room, because we went out and got Stephon Thompson from Syracuse. Stephon Thompson was with Tony White over at Syracuse. And, his freshman year, he came out of the gates, was the first true freshman starter in Syracuse in 10 years. And started immediately, came out and had a great season. He had his I think he was 4 forced fumbles, which was first in the I think it was first in the ACC. I can't quite remember the stats off the top of my head. But then going into his, second freshman season, because 2020 was his freshman season, the COVID year, he was second in the team in tackles that year, and was second behind Michael Jones, who ended up going and actually playing in the NFL. Not very long, but that's the type of guy who's behind, was on the Butkus Award finalist list. So,
Yeah.
but he was supposed to be the guy that took over whenever Michael Jones left for the NFL. But then he tore his ACL in 2022. Again, very similar story to the Isaiah Nair. Came back in 2023, had 53 tackles. The thing about the offseason and the recovery from Stephon Thompson between 2022 and 2023 that people don't realize is he was in a green practice jersey, non-contact, for much of the offseason. So he actually had to get confidence back in that ligament and get those reps on the field. And so for him to come out and still have 53 tackles and have a really good season, and I think it's one of those things where they saw, hey, an under the radar type of guy, still a 90 rated guy in the portal, but he's going to come over and instantly he's a very versatile linebacker. He's 6'1", about 240. So he can come off the edge, he can play the middle, but I believe he's going to be in the jack position, moving around a lot. A lot of playmakers on this defense and a lot of young talent on this defense. We return a lot of guys. So I think the defense is one of those things that's going to be very sustainable.
So defense looks set and bolstered. Offense has a lot of hope. Matt Rhule is known as, a year 2 guy, right? Mm-hmm. He traditionally has popped every second year wherever he's gone. Temple, Baylor. They have a tougher schedule.
Mm-hmm.
They're at USC, they're at Iowa this year, they're at Ohio State. They host Wisconsin, UCLA, and Rutgers, and Colorado. What do you see happening 2024? I know this is way too early prediction.
Oh yeah.
What would you say right now year 2 is going to look like for Matt Rhule in Nebraska?
Yeah, our last Tuesday live stream, we actually went over the schedule, so this is perfect timing for that. I had it pegged at 8-4. I think we come out early in the season because that early slate of games is fairly easy. Those are all very winnable games, and then the back half it gets a little bit tougher. And so I think just kind of like the toll of those games and playing some of those tough games on the road is going to add up, and the travel and all that. And so I think the back half is where we're going to kind of drop a few of those games. But I think if we can, especially at the end of the season, if we can win like maybe 2 of the last 3, I think that would be big going into the offseason. But, I peg it at an 8-4 schedule, just trying to be that's probably about my middle of the road. I would say the floor is, probably 6 wins. And then the ceiling, I would have to go back over it to look at the ceiling. I try not to look at the ceiling because I usually am let down. So, but yeah, it's a easy front half, relentless back half. But the good thing about that is that gives Raiola time to get in there and develop and get these young guys time to get in there and develop. The schedule couldn't have worked out more perfect in that instance. Because we are such a young team, it is going to be good for him to get in there and get some of those. I'm not going to say easy games because nothing's been easy for us, but those more winnable, easier games,
Yeah. Last question, and then I'll send you out here. Which game would you point to say this is the make or break game for our season?
I would probably have to say, there's a stretch there where first off, I think Colorado we probably need to beat. I think that's just because of the polarization of that game and the conversation in the national media. If we lose to Colorado twice in a row and have to deal with the primetime nonsense, that's one for the national. Yeah, don't get me started on that. That's one for the national, kind of overall view. But I think, in regards to just the schedule, I really think we need to finally pull like an upset of some kind. It seems like we haven't had a win against a ranked opponent, and what is it, since 2019 or something like that? Or it's been a long time since we won against top 25 opponent. I think that is going to be a key this year, is trying to finally get over the hump in one of those instances. I think it's going to be one of those where we have to kind of break a trend somewhere. And I think that's a good start. I think there is going to be some on this schedule, some teams that may sneak in the back half of the top 25, and I think, and even going on and competing with a team like, an Ohio State and keeping it close with them on top of maybe pulling a top 25 upset or, pulling off a couple of one-score victories. I don't think there's any one game I can point to and say, this is a must win. I think it's just, and I think year 3, we can start to do that. I think in year 2, it's still going to see a lot of these things progress. And I think it's just little notches in the cap that we haven't been able to get over the hump. And that's like getting that monkey off the back of not beating a top 25 team, of making a bowl game and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I have Nebraska at USC circled.
Yeah.
Because I think if Raiola can play well and they are physical, although I think Danton Lynn, that hire was really good for USC.
Mm-hmm.
But I could see where the physicality, even at Southern Cal, could really mess with the Trojans. Yeah.
And we alluded to this on our show when we were talking about, is this a preview of what's to come with the Big Ten, the Big Ten going against the Pac-12 in the national championship game, the top of the top, was that kind of a wake-up call for the Pac-12 to be like, okay, like maybe we're going to have to adjust a little bit more to the Big Ten style of play because they kind of got bullied.
Yeah.
And, that's another thing that I'm not sure is what's going to happen with these, Pac-12 teams come over that aren't used to the physicality, seeing how they're going to transition over to that because, USC is a very good team, but it would do a lot for Nebraska beating a couple of these teams that come over from the Pac-12 and kind of set the tone early because of, this is the first season that this is all kind of taking place. And I think it's going to be an arms race in the very beginning. And it's going to be a lot of that Pac-12 versus Big Ten mentality still in there. And so I think that's why those games are especially important. I think that's one of those games where Nebraska really to show that they are, transitioning into a Big Ten team, they're going to have to show their physicality against those type of teams, and they're going to have to be able to out physical those type of teams to be able to compete in the Big Ten. It's one of those things where it's exciting to see, but it's also kind of nerve wracking in a way because you don't know what to expect with a lot of these teams coming over. So it'll be fun though.
Yeah. Well, this has been fun. So thank you, Justin, for coming on the show again. Real quick, where can we find you on your shows and on social media?
Yeah. So you can follow me at on X at @the_H-Town Husker. And Mark Rogers over at Nebraska Football at the Voice of College Football. So if you search that or Nebraska VOC FB, and then also at Big Ten Show on X and Big Ten Show on YouTube as well. So
cool. Well, Justin, thanks again for being on the show. Again, for all of you guys, make sure to check out the Big Ten Show, Mark Rogers, the Nebraska Show, and check out Justin on X as well. Of course, you know where to find us: Spotify, Google, Apple. Leave a review, shoot us emails. We really are so grateful for you all. Make sure you guys tune in on Thursday. We'll be back. Until then, take care and God bless.
Peace.